I'll concede your point just for brevity. But
What? Brevity? We don't do that around here. It's probably
No.
citrus, or what is a Capital One Bowl? It used to be Citrus Bowl, right?
oh
Yeah,
my
Capital
God,
One.
dude, where have you been?
I just like the real name.
It hasn't been the Citrus Bowl since like what 2002?
What was your highlight side dish from Thanksgiving?
Oh gosh, Scotch.
This is the Buck Around, the podcast devoted to all things Wisconsin Badger football from a fan perspective. Featuring your hosts, Richard Branch and Maxwell Brusky.
And hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Buck Around. Welcome back to episode, what number am I on? 366 of the Buck Around. I am one half of the Buck Around, Richard Branch, and I am not joined by what is he today? He is the world traveling colleague, Maxwell Brusky, who is not here. However, I am not talking to a blank wall like a crazy person today because I got a very delightful pinch hitter for today, step-in guest, first-time guest of the podcast, the distinguished Jim Polzin of, I think of you as the Badger Extra to guy because I subscribe to Badger Extra, but the Wisconsin State Journal, Madison.com, I don't know, columnist at large. What do you call yourself, Jim? I don't even know titles these days.
Yeah, I call myself a columnist, and it's always a struggle when I have to tell people where I'm from. Like yesterday, I was on Wisconsin Public Radio, and they're like, well, "What do we say you're from?" I'm like, "Oh, I think for that crowd, the Wisconsin State Journal. Your crowd, Rich, like Badger Extra, probably, because I think you have more of a natural reach, and we want people to subscribe to Badger Extra as possible." So
we represent the Badger diaspora, is what I like to say. You know, as the headquarters, well, one half of the headquarters of the Buck Around is in Connecticut and the other half is in Chicago. I guess that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So, Jim, thank you for coming on. First time, long time. I'm really disappointed we are not continuing the blood feud that I tried to start. Like, I lost track of that bit like 2 minutes after it started because Max distracted me during that podcast because I was really going to lean into it. So I'm really disappointed this can't be angrier, but you know.
I'm a lover, not a fighter. And oh, by the way, who knew that touchdown we were arguing about was going to be the last one for a long, long time? No?
Well, yeah, until you throw a moonshot to Eugene Hilton that gets pulled down in double coverage. I mean, that's how they're going to score. So yeah, that's a good segue for me to get into this Oregon game, to maybe get a little thoughts. But I think part of the reason to have you on was one, what you put out this morning, which kind of that worked out nicely after I asked you to come on and you're like, oh, and by the way, I have this little column you might be interested in. And I was like, oh, great. But I do want to touch on the game a little bit before we do. But two quick things. Everybody will notice I don't have a talk around today. And there's one reason for that. You're all exhausted and none of you called in. And I can tell the fandom is tired. So I don't blame you. There's no scolding here because, I don't blame you. It's 2-6 and it's rough and it's just numb at this point. But conversely, I do have one thing to mention. I'd like to thank our new patron who just goes by T, which is very mysterious. Thank you for signing up. If I may take off my Prince of Darkness armor for a moment and say it's very much appreciated that you sign up for that when the team is where it is and general interest level is where it's at. So that is very much appreciated. And also, like when we do get the talker ones, everyone's like, thank you for sticking around. It does mean a lot. So yeah, it's still fun to do. So Max and I will still be here, probably talking about food recipes. I don't know, at some point if this thing keeps sliding towards 2 and 10, but enough of that. Let me get into it, Jim. There's three things that I took from this game because I don't really need to talk about it. 21-7, people are like, wow, they looked better. I guess they sort of did. I think rain compresses things a lot. Would you agree?
I would agree, yes.
So I think that one would have been a little bit more what we expected had it not been raining sideways for a big chunk of the game. But the big one that jumped out to me, Gideon Atuka, right? I know you guys have been asked, you've been at every presser pretty much all from fall camp to now, more or less, maybe one or two you haven't. But he's kind of been a guy that people every once in a while ask about, but nobody really thought about because he never played, right? But my assumption going into this, we were going to see, if they were going to play 60 snaps on offense, which I guess they barely ever do now, but let's say they play 60 snaps, it was going to be 40 Yakimelli, 20 Atuka. But we didn't get that. We kind of got the opposite. Did that surprise you?
Yeah, I don't know. Like if you watch Atuka at the end of the Ohio State game, I thought I saw some stuff, and you have to kind of view that through the lens of it being Ohio State's backups.
Right.
But Atuka has shown some stuff, like really since he got here last spring already. Like he runs hard. He didn't have the name of those other two, but I'm like, wow, if this is the throw-in running back in a 3-man class, okay, like this is a guy that can play at some point, especially if someone goes down. So I liked what I saw. I don't know that I thought much about the rep distribution, but at least what I like about him is he will get going north and south, and not a lot of dancing. He's a power runner. So I don't know that I'm surprised. I'm surprised he got to 80 yards, because these days when a UW running back gets to 80 yards, it's breaking news. But Yakimelli got hurt. That certainly contributed. I've always kind of thought Yakimelli should play more all along, basically since he's been here.
Yeah.
And that hasn't happened. So I don't know. I don't know how I thought the distribution would shake out, but I do think that if you're listing positive, that Atuka was one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing on Yakimelli that, yes, he did get hurt, but he had 3 snaps in the first possession. Then the next, I think 2 possessions were more or less the Gideon Atuka show, with one Yakimelli sort of sprinkled in there. And I guess the part that fascinated me was it almost felt like Yakimelli's job is a bit different. It's sort of like going back to Dare. Everyone who listens to this podcast knows my favorite Badger running back, who was much more like the old school third down NFL style back. And it's kind of like Yakimelli is that role still, like even if they're going down the depth chart here. And it's just kind of fascinating me. Like, I think that's always going to be a guy who best case scenario is in 35% of the snap. But speaking of another guy who never really bumped, who I saw his snaps not where I thought they'd be, Tackett Curtis. So if we go back to last week, about 3.5 quarters through the game, he disappeared. Maybe it was 2.5 quarters through the game, and it was Mason Posa and Cooper Catalano. This week, Tackett Curtis played 2 snaps. 2 snaps. Did that surprise you as much as it surprised me? Because it legitimately surprised me. Like when I saw Christian Allegro out, I was just like, oh, okay, well, it's going to be Curtis and then Posa Catalano will sort of rotate. The 3 of them will be the stew. But it was not that. I mean, the fall of Tackett Curtis seems quite severe to me, because he's effectively the 4th linebacker by my logic.
Yeah, I think it speaks to how much they like Catalano and Posa. Curtis, like Colton will tell you this, we'll be watching games, and Colton, before anybody, will see something that Curtis did wrong, right? That maybe the casual fan doesn't notice. So I think there's been a dissatisfaction with Curtis to some degree, and it's just a matter of getting Catalano and Posa ready. And those guys, I think, are ready, right? And the more snaps you give them, I think the test with young guys always is put them out there, don't overwhelm them, and make them earn more snaps. And I think we've seen every week those guys have earned more snaps to the point where I think you can put them on the field for long stretches of time, and there's no drop off. There's not really any issues. So I want to say it's more about them than it is about Tackett Curtis.
The only thing I'd say about Curtis that I've always been puzzled by is the size. He is the smallest 235-pound linebacker I feel like I've ever seen. And he always looks like a supersized safety to me. And he's that tweener guy. Like, he kind of doesn't have a home.
Yeah, they love his ability to get sideline to sideline, right? That's the one thing they love about him. But you're right. Physically, I always wondered if he could hold up. His ability to read and react at times, I think, has been questioned. So
yeah.
Again, I think the future is Posa and Catalano, and I think they have come to grips with that. Like when Allegro comes back, that's going to be tricky, like how you distribute the reps among those 3, because I do think Posa was really, really good on Saturday.
Yeah, I don't see how. I mean, I think it's just, again, it makes you question Curtis, because Allegro is clearly the guy I think that's their favorite of their guys. I mean, because I know he was recruited by Christ and those guys, but they kept him around and moved him inside from outside. So I still think they consider him kind of their guy. So he's not coming off the field. I mean, that guy plays every snap. I mean, who knows what you do with a broken arm and what the timetable
he
is.
very well could be their most consistent player on the team.
Yeah,
I think I do. I think he's been solid, especially compared to others.
Yeah. And then speaking of consistent, sort of the last thing I want to touch on from the game, one guy who is very consistent, but I would argue consistently bad. And that is Hunter Simmons. And I have a question for you, because this is something like, sometimes we have questions in the show that are sort of rhetorical for Max and I to kick things off. This is a legitimate question that I have that I'm still trying to figure out. And it goes off this premise. One, people pound their fists all day and do all that stuff, and they get PO'd at coaches and this and that. I know these coaches aren't stupid. They are high-level football coaches. I don't care if you go 2-10, you're in the powerful, you know what you're doing, right? So I know there is a thought process. There may be a judgment call that's wrong, but there is a thought process, right? And usually, even if you don't agree with something, you can say, well, I understand how they arrive here. The one I cannot figure out is why Hunter Simmons is the starting quarterback. He's like you and I, as we just discussed before we hit the red button here, are of the same age. So you are familiar with a guy named Mike Samuel, who was a unique quarterback in Badger history, if you're old enough to know who he was. And this reminds me, I realize Hunter Simmons is Mike Samuel without mobility. For those who don't know, Mike Samuel was the quarterback when Ron Dane was around. Had a year, I think, with 4 touchdown passes and 7 picks. One year was quite a stat line. And then the following year, I think, followed up with 6 touchdowns, and he got the picks down to 2. But they also threw the ball. I think there was the bowl game where he had 16 yards passing. It was the Copper Bowl or something like that in an early Dane year. He was a unique guy. But Hunter Simmons reminds me so much of him because he's a guy who they've tried to simplify the game as much as they can. They roll him out pretty much every pass play, so he's looking at half the field. It's maybe 2 reads. They're not asking him to make big throws. When Fickle talks about they need to take deep shots, he knows they can't. It confuses me what they're doing. He always looks scared. He does that shoulder dropping throw like he's going to get hit, and it's moonshots. I mean, the Eugene Hilton pass that, I think did we talk about it after I hit record or before? I don't know, but like that was just that was a moonshot prayer, and it was into double coverage, and the defender just didn't turn around. So, okay, great, you got to play, but let's not pretend it's real. And you compare him to Danny O'Neal. Hunter Simmons' best performance was mop-up duty against Maryland, right? He had that 7-for-9 run there, and they said, oh, maybe we saw something, and then all of a sudden he's the starter. Danny O'Neal's best performance was Middle Tennessee State, right? It was it was Middle Tennessee State, right? Had a very good game against an overmatched opponent. But Danny O'Neal's best is clearly better than Hunter Simmons' best, and I think Danny O'Neal's worst is not any worse. And he has disappeared, save for some random snaps, right? I mean, 3 snaps against Michigan, one against Ohio State, I believe, also the injury.
Yeah, 1 or 2, yeah.
Yeah. So
it's weird.
What's going on there?
I don't know. I wish I had an answer for you. It's weird. I would like to say there's an injury situation with O'Neal, but that doesn't explain then why you'd throw him out there in games, right? You would just sit him unless, use in case of emergency. From a 1-game sample, Oregon, it's wet, and maybe that played a role in their decision making, that Danny O'Neal has trouble hanging onto the ball. The game's relatively close. Why throw him out there? And really, I'm just making excuses here, Rich, because I don't know the answer. Okay. It's weird. I will just say it's really weird. It doesn't make sense to me why you would recruit a kid to be a backup and potential future starter and then just use him for a couple games and then just completely bench him and not even consider him. The whole thing is kind of bizarre to me, and I don't have an answer. And I don't know that Luke Fickle's doing a good enough job explaining the situation. That's part of the problem here.
So to your point, he did, I think Colton, honestly, the last 3 games has been the one to ask, why is Hunter Simmons the starter, or a version of that? And this last week he asked him in Oregon, and it's kind of surreal as he's asking him because you can hear the Oregon team celebrating in their in the back of the video. If people haven't seen it, it's kind of like, wow. It kind of drives the point home. Sort of everybody's soaking wet and looks depressed, and the music's blasting in the background and players are cheering. It's quite a surreal thing to watch. But he was asked about it, and I'm still trying to understand what this quote means, because he said, and I cleaned some of the language up just for readability, not for cursing. But he said, we thought about it again, and they asked, why did you stick with Hunter Simmons? And talked about it before the game, just based on the first couple of drives, and we didn't want to go away until we thought there was something about Danny that would give us an opportunity. As we were rolling, I didn't ask as much until halftime. I do think the conditions make it difficult, to your point, to throw another guy in there and who hasn't taken snaps and hasn't been in that situation. Whether it was pouring, whether it was the wind that was blowing sideways, there were a lot of factors. But it might be one of those things where you kind of go back and kick yourself and say, I think there are some opportunities he's here for Danny. He has said that in 3 weeks. Like, oh, you think maybe there is an opportunity. But the weird line is at the end. And I'm trying to figure out what this means. And this is where I can go into conjecture land, as I said to you, as a guy who sits in his house in a sweatshirt versus being a guy in the media. And this is the one that I'm hanging on. Because the last line he said is, we're going to need Danny down the stretch. And we need Danny to stick with us and stay with us and see how this thing rolls. And I am trying to decode that sentence because I am trying to figure out if that is Danny O'Neil is a soft portal. I am trying to figure out if that's like they're not getting anything out of him and he's kind of quiet quit. I'm hung up on it. Would you like to wade into my pond of conjecture?
No, I mean, I hate doing that. But certainly as you read that quote and as I heard it, you do wonder whether whether he's checked out. I think that's where my mind went.
Yeah.
Has Danny O'Neil checked out? And that's unfair to Danny O'Neil because I don't know. I don't know. We haven't talked to. I think Colton and I were talking yesterday. I think he's going to request Danny O'Neil next week and probably get rejected on that request, but at least make the attempt to talk to him. I think back to your original point, Rich, sort of the trust the coaches because they know more than we do. The other thing we have to consider is that Danny O'Neil has not been good in practice. In whatever percentage of reps he's getting, maybe there's a turnover issue that has carried over from the games we saw into practice, and they are at the point where they just don't think they can trust him. That's one possibility, right? Now, when you watch a guy have as many incompletions as he did passing yards through 3 quarters as Hunter Simmons did the other day, I think you would maybe change your mind and say, let's do something else. But Fickle sometimes does what he did Saturday night, and it's almost like he's throwing Easter eggs out there, and it leaves a lot of us not knowing what to think.
Well, he did. Again, is this another one of these things like the Billy Edwards cleanup he did a few weeks ago?
Right.
Where it's, okay, he just kind of said things awkwardly and it's taken in a way that he doesn't think he's saying. I don't know. But I guess the other part to me is he's like, well, we talked about maybe switching quarterbacks, but in preparation. But then once the game's rolling, we didn't talk about it. And that's the part that I also get confused.
Yeah.
I feel like through line you can have through his whole tenure in Madison is that his relationships with his offensive coordinator seem very weird. And it kind of feels like he doesn't know what he wants a lot of the time. And when they come in and they do their thing, all of a sudden it becomes, this isn't what I want. Like, I'm not going to argue, this is not a Phil Longo apologia in any way, but it's kind of weird. You bring a guy in, he was really the only one he didn't have a direct relationship or like somebody on his staff had a relationship, like Matt Mitchell and Tressel went back. So I get that he and Luke didn't have any connection, but at least someone else that he trusts had a connection. But, Phil Longo and him were just did some coaching conventions, right?
Yeah.
That's more or less how they summarize their relationship. He brings him in and Phil brings his handpicked offensive line coach who, Bicknell said in his available, is like, OCs and O-line coaches go together places. And then he fires him, right? He pays him not to work. As our listeners were telling us, they paid him to go buy groceries for a year. They would run into him at, wherever. And then the running back rotation thing where they had 7 running backs. And then the next week, Fickle's like, we're done with that. And that just sort of happens. And now you've got Grimes, who is sort of the wide zone guy. And that's all we heard about, wide zone, wide zone, wide zone. The offense is built around the wide zone. That disappeared, right? Even if they couldn't pull it off, they just went away from it. And it takes you 4 games to figure out your starting offensive line. Not even just injury stuff. It's like to know what you have. Because Davis Heinsohn, they ran a whole camp with him and then dumped him in 3 quarters, realizing that was a dead. Like, how did you not know that 15 practices ago? Like, I'm rambling and not asking a question, but I am asking a question. Like, what's going on? Like, what's the deal with him and offensive coordinators?
I don't know. My theory is that he's such a defensive-minded guy.
Yeah.
That's where his focus is. And I think, let's go back to Cincinnati, right? He had Mike Denbrock and a starting quarterback in Desmond Ridder, who for 4 years was healthy and never had to worry about. So I think as a defensive guy, you kind of get locked in. I trust my offensive coordinator. I don't really have to even worry about who the quarterback's going to be snap to snap, much less game to game, right? And I think maybe he thought the same would happen at Wisconsin. And he's like, I hired someone. I'm going to trust that person. And I think he's a little bit hands off to some degree. But you brought up, where he wasn't hands off was in the media talking about the running back rotation and stuff like that, right? So I think he wants to interject his opinion at places. I don't know why he doesn't more often. That's a really good off-season topic to discuss with him, I think, is maybe his philosophy on doing that, because I do think he's missed opportunities to kind of take ownership of of a really important position and a really important part of this team. Maybe because he is deferring, which at some point a head coach can't do. Even if you've got a defensive minded head coach, you have to kind of step in and be part of the decision making. But it is weird. Like I know I've used that word a couple times. It's the whole thing is weird.
It's enigmatic. I would go
Yeah.
so far as to think it's like it's sort of black holy. I'm glad that you feel that way on the closer to it, certainly, because from the outside I find it it's hard to try to parse, right? Like to sort of segue into the, like, I get, there are things that people don't like or, are disappointed, like the Macintosh comments, last week. I get it. Like I get the logic behind it. I get why it happened. And this is why we're going to segue into your Kellner thing. I get what he's saying there. And it's sort of the only way he could go forward and still be employed. But it's been a week. We have now seen Brian Kelly lose his job. And if the Badgers had fired Fickell, they would be in a group with LSU, Penn State, Florida, who I think would all be jobs above them. And I guess in the peer group of Virginia Tech, Arkansas, UCLA, Oklahoma State-ish. I think the Badgers are probably better than all those, but they're in the same neighborhood, so to speak. Do you think this kind of 1 year carousel thing, or like we're in like a carousel bubble, I think, to some degree with this NIL stuff going on. Do you think maybe his decision is looking smarter a week later? I mean, we don't know yet, but maybe not to try to wade into these waters?
Maybe. I can't help thinking that Wisconsin, whoever would be the next pool of candidates for Wisconsin, maybe wouldn't be swimming in the same waters as LSU and Penn State, right? Like, because I hate to even speculate on who the next person would be, considering Luke Fickell still has a job. But let's face it, like the names have already been thrown out there, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Lance Leipold, Jason Eck, maybe Matt Campbell at Iowa State would at least be deserving of a call. I don't know that any of those three, except for maybe Campbell, are going to be considered elsewhere, right? Like I think if they decide to move on at some point next year or whatever, I think the candidate pool will be relatively small, right? Because I mean, they're not going to go swing big again, right?
Well, they always do the opposite, right? Isn't that the thing in coaching? Like whenever you have a hire that doesn't work out, you sort of like swing the pendulum to the opposite style of guy. You go from the flashy recruiter to
Gary Anderson, Paul Chryst, right?
Exactly.
Barry did. I don't know that there's a Paul Chryst obvious candidate waiting, unless of course Chris McIntosh is gone. Then I think Jim Leonard
That's it. Yeah.
Kick that. Yeah. So I don't know. And I don't know. I think you're right that this has been a weird year carousel wise. Last year was much quieter, and maybe next year is going to be much quieter. And so maybe that theory is good that you give him his fourth year. If it doesn't work out, the pool of candidates will be bigger, and maybe more about a guy like Jason Eck, and maybe somebody's ready to move. I get that.
Yeah, I mean, I only look at it from the perspective of it. I'm not arguing that it's good to keep Fickell necessarily. I'm not arguing that, and whatever. You can't make that argument at this point, like, oh, that there's something. I really don't think objectively you can make an argument that there's measurable things going on because a couple inside linebackers and the fourth string running back look okay. I just don't think you're there. You don't have enough. But neither here nor there. I guess the question, or maybe the point I'm making, is if his job is secure, which again, let's get into Ted Kellner there, who, you know what, we don't even have to pontificate on your response summed it up well. Here's my question. Ted Kellner, you had a conversation, right? I read the article this morning. You reached out to him, right?
Yes.
3 years ago, he made a very public statement. I don't comment on job security and people. I don't get in here. Why is he now saying I back Chris McIntosh? I mean, because he was on the committee.
When did he say that, Rich? I don't know.
About Paul Chryst. He said, no, we don't push for firing.
Okay.
It's you can find it. It's on.
Yeah, I believe you. I'm not. My memory at this age is.
It's okay. I'm much younger and fresher, so it's okay.
That's interesting. I guess I didn't know that. Why is he commenting? I don't know.
Yeah.
Here's how I explain it to him. Like, I reached out to him yesterday. I caught him at a bad time. He said, I'll call you back. He calls me back later in the morning, and I'm like, here, Ted, here's why I'm calling you. Number one, we talked almost exactly a year ago leading into the Oregon game, and that was mostly a discussion about NIL. And now coming out of that Oregon game, I thought it'd be at least good to check in with you on NIL and other stuff. And number two, and this is true, I've had a lot of people come up to me in the past month or so and saying, what does Ted Kellner think? Like, I wonder what Ted Kellner's thinking. I'm like, well, maybe it's time to just try. And I didn't know if he'd take my call, didn't know if he would talk. And but my first question was very softball-ish. What are how are you feeling right now, basically, on the state of the program? And
Right.
NIL. And he went on this long-winded opening statement, essentially, that not a ramble, because I thought there was some valuable information in there. But he made it very, very clear where he stands. He is in Chris McIntosh's corner. And if Chris McIntosh is in Luke Fickell's corner, then he's in Luke Fickell's corner. And he introduced the idea that there's going to be more NIL spending. And I'm sure we can get into that. So he laid it all out there and left no question about where he stands.
I think so like we said, McIntosh's basic statement was, hey, NIL is the name of the game here, and that's how this team gets competitive again. You and I both believe there are holes in that argument.
Yeah.
If you're not losing to Iowa 37-0 because of NIL, right? You're not losing to Maryland because of NIL. There are underlying structural coaching issues there. But it doesn't mean that NIL isn't part of the issue. But
Absolutely.
It's definitely not the only issue. I was going back last night looking through a lot of your reporting and Colton's reporting on all the different iterations of the Varsity Collective and forgot that Brooks Bollinger was there for a hot minute. And is Rob Master still there?
He is, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And, then they had these things like pull up the screenshots I was sending to my friends because we were laughing. The Life Currency program. Do you remember that?
Now that you say it, yes.
Where JJ Watt was going to be mentoring people, or where Joe Thomas was talking about how much his Merrill Lynch internship helped him start a business after his NFL career. Nothing to do with the fact that he's like possibly the most famous offensive lineman who ever played in the NFL, or the best one. Okay. Like, it always felt awkward. And it always felt like the whole collective is very uncomfortable with where college football is. And Ted Kellner being one of the founders of it, and in that group of people who I think are fundamentally uncomfortable with this idea of giving 18-year-olds big chunks of money. He has also said, I'm a believer. I was looking at some of his quotes, and I think in your column, I'm a believer in free market capitalism. Yeah. And so, hey, I got no problem with this. But do you sense that? Is there a shift in him? Because this has all been, I feel like throughout this whole thing since the collective was founded, it has been those guys dealing with a dynamic they're very uncomfortable with and trying to find workarounds to create value, but without just making it money. And the reality is, I don't think that's plausible if they want to compete where they want to compete. So do you get a sense that he's changing that?
Yeah, I think so. I think what they found out, and listen, I sat there in that first press conference for the Varsity Collective, and all of it sounded very good. I understand why you're looking at this from a holistic approach, right? I get it. And you want to teach these student athletes something, and beyond what they're getting in, beyond the fact that their wallet's getting bigger, you want to teach them something that will last for the rest of the lifetime. I get it. But I think you're right. It's become so transactional that I think they found that out, that, you know what, we need to get in the transactional world. I asked Ted, so this did not make it in the column, but because it was getting too long already. But I asked Ted, I'm like, listen, I think when we talked a year ago, and correct me if I'm wrong, I got the sense that there's just not a great appetite among the donor base to pay kids, right? To just flat out give these kids money, some of whom haven't even earned it yet, have not done anything on the field to earn these paychecks. Has that changed? And Ted kind of pushed back. He's like, I think, if you go back to this spring, apparently there was pretty big fundraising for football and men's basketball among the donor base. And I think that was mostly to get ready for the revenue share, to kind of front load a lot of these deals so that when NIL Go kicked in on July 1st or whenever, they had kind of had those contracts done and some of the payments made already. So I think there was a big push, and I think that was Ted's way of saying, we've kind of embraced this to some degree. Now, he acknowledged not enough, and Chris McIntosh has acknowledged not enough. The money doesn't match what other programs are pushing out. They have fallen behind. I don't know that they're ever going to catch up, but at least now there's a willingness, I think. How it's going to look, I don't know. And I know you're curious about it. I'm curious about it. Everybody I talk to is curious. What kind of money are we talking? What does this mean? Are they really actually going to go out and compete with the rest of the college football and the transfer portal for really, really good players that can be difference makers? We're going to find that out in the next couple months. But I think my sense from Ted was that there is more of a willingness, at least, to do that.
All right. Because this isn't really a question. Maybe it is. But like my assumption is when we saw Davis Heinsohn as observers starting at left tackle to open the season, that was Kevin Haywood was sharpied in as the starting left tackle last year, right? I mean, we saw him play every special team snap. You knew he was the starter. We all knew that. The world knew that. He was going to be probably a pretty good one because they identified it right away. When he got hurt in spring, they literally had to say to themselves, we need to find another body who we have to pay nothing. And that's who David, I mean, and it's no knock on Davis Heinsohn. It seems like he's found a role as the third center. I give him credit. Like he's not killing him, but that was a function of NIL to me. Like that just screamed this is the best option they had, which was a guy you pay zero. And
I think that's fair because Joe Cotton, who was at South Dakota State, I believe, was kind of in the same boat, a spring transfer.
Yeah.
Ended up at Cincy.
Yeah.
Now, if Cincy's outspending you, that's tough, right? If you're Wisconsin, if you're getting outspent by Texas Tech, which has a lot of oil money, it's one thing. And I don't know. Like I don't know what the dynamics of that were. I don't know that Wisconsin had run out of money at that point. That's the other thing I don't understand about this all is, certainly there's a revenue sharing budget that they have to hit. And there's now the third party NIL too, that there's money out there. It's hard for me to believe that Wisconsin was just dead broke in April or May or whatever and couldn't find some money. That would surprise me. So I don't know. I don't know what went on. I don't know if they thought Davis Heinsohn was better than he was. I don't know if they thought they had backup options. It's one of the bigger question marks. Because as you said early in the show, it was pretty clear to any of us that watched that Davis Heinsohn was not the answer at left tackle. And the biggest problem I have with what happened is their backup plan apparently was to put Riley Mullman there. We didn't see any of Riley Mullman at left tackle in camp. So if that's your backup plan, I would have thought we'd have seen that at some point, and we didn't.
Right.
And all of a sudden you're starting from scratch in game 2.
So, and one more for you before I let you go, because this is the other one. And I think this dovetails really nicely to your background back as a reporter before you even got into sort of the column side. What have they figured out in basketball to make this work? And why hasn't it translated over? I mean, I get it's a different landscape, different roster build with 12 guys, but like, what did they figure out there?
So I think Greg Gard deserves a hell of a lot of credit because he essentially realized that I think the collective was pouring a lot of its efforts in terms of fundraising into football, and probably rightfully so to some degree, right? And he realized if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to keep my program competitive, I kind of need to do a grassroots thing. And he rolled up his sleeves and got out there and found, I think, some of his most loyal donors and figured it out. He just figured it out. He went and I think explained the situation. Here's what we need. Here's why we need it. He figured out some ways to make those people happy. Come watch a football game at my house, which probably sounds silly, but I think if you're giving money, it personalizes it. It's just not Greg Gard going out with his hand out asking for money. He's finding ways to connect. And I think he was honest up front about, hey, I'm probably gonna be back next year at this time because this isn't changing. And he's figured it out. And they've been, I don't want to say they've been better than the football program at getting ahead of things, but they're having discussions with John Blackwell and Nolan Winter in January of a season that's going on, and the retention part of it has already started, and so they're keeping those kids happy and still having money left over to fill some holes in the portal. So I do think like one thing we have to, you said it, but it is easier with a smaller roster to plug holes than it is in football. I would love to sit inside a NIL meeting for football because how much are you giving to the quarterback? How much of your budget is going to the quarterback? And then if that player gets hurt, yikes, right? Like it's you've devoted a lot of money to a guy that's not playing in Billy Edwards. And some of that is just, what do? You kind of throw your hands up. My pushback to that, sorry, I'm arguing with myself here.
No, go.
Is you knew this, right? Like 2 years you've had quarterbacks go down. You need to have a better backup option. And I think they thought that was Danny O'Neal. And now we're to the point where they're not even playing Danny O'Neal, right? Like they don't trust Danny O'Neal to play. That is a fundamental error in building your roster to be better equipped if your starter does go down.
Yeah, well, I think that one that's the puzzle, and it goes back to the OC thing for me because I watched every Danny O'Neal snap from last year. He was on a bad team, went 4-8, but he was like, okay, here's kind of a moxie guy, little scrappy dude. Definitely doesn't have a big arm, but he's good enough, right? Like, and you could see like, oh, I could see him in a competition, sort of for an offense in like a pistol-y set, that kind of thing with the legs, and that's gone for whatever reason. Like even the guy you saw against Middle Tennessee State, which kind of had that look, like, oh, that's the guy. Obviously he's not going to maintain that performance, but you see it there. But then you see him come in and he's turfing 7-yard slants, and you're like, I don't understand what happened here. Like they're all mentally Like they all look like they have a lot of trauma. Maybe it's the offensive line has done that to them. PTSD. All right, Jim, I've kept you longer than I said I would. I do this. This is actually what I do to Colton. I don't know if you know this. When we ask him to come in and do like the I'm like, oh, it'll be 25 minutes. And then I keep him for 50. Like that's my move. And I just straight up lie to him now, but I was being honest to you, just so you know. I wasn't lying.
I'm fine. Like honestly, this has been a good conversation and it's gone fast. So that's always a good sign.
Oh, well, there you go. I mean, it's like we're speed dating here, Jim. Maybe we'll try this again. So again, thank you, Jim Polzin, Badger Extra. What else do we want? Madison.com, as you said, what's the audience? Wisconsin State Journal.
Fuck around.
Yeah, we don't need to plug. They're already here. That's not how this works. That's the only way they find us. Thank you for doing this. I really do appreciate you stepping in to pinch it on like 12 hours notice too. So you're my MVP.
Shows you how little of a life I have.
Shows you how little I plan. So thanks again, Jim. All right. And for everybody, just a bit of housekeeping. No show next week. It's a bye week. There's nothing else to talk about. Jim and I kind of did a pretty bye weekish show right here. So we'll leave it at that unless Max demands we do something. And then I'll tell him I'll just show up and listen because I've done my part already. So Max, it's on you. So see you in a couple weeks, everybody. And thanks again, Jim.
Enjoy the conversation? Head on over to buckaroundpodcast.com to find all the ways to connect with the show, links to our Patreon page, and feeds for every major podcasting platform. We want to thank each and every one of our patrons. You make this podcast possible. This has been The Buck Around, Badger football analysis from a fan perspective.